Most of us are familiar with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. The assassination forever changed the story of America and made this country a very, very different place than it would have been otherwise, altering the development of countless domestic and foreign policies. What is less known is that this world could have been even more different. In 1960, fortune was on Kennedy's side, and he escaped an assassination attempt simply because his wife and children were in the right place at the right time. Had it not been for their presence at church on a normal Sunday morning, this world could have been a very, very different place. First, meet the star of today's video, Richard Paul Pavlik. In 1960, Richard Pavlik was a 73-year-old retired postal worker. In the 1950s, he lived in Belmont, Massachusetts, where he became known for his angry and slightly unhinged rants about the government and Catholics in general. The focus of many of Pavlik's rants was the Kennedy family and John Kennedy himself. This was unsurprising. As the first Catholic elected president, Kennedy was the target of hatred for many who held anti-Catholic beliefs. As one might surmise, given the odd nature of his rants, Pavlik was viewed as unhinged by the local population. Pavlik also thought that a water company was poisoning the town, which might be just dismissed as a little bit wacky, if not for the fact that he was so convinced that this was the case that he accosted a supervisor for the water company with a gun at the man's home. Kennedy, of course, was elected president on November 8, 1960. As is par for the course, Kennedy was president-elect, awaiting the formal swearing-in that would occur in January. During that time, Richard Pavlik became increasingly unhinged. He donated his small home to a youth camp and got in his car, where he began to follow the Kennedy family. This is where Pavlik's mouth caught up with him, or in this case, his letters. Pavlik wrote his old postmaster, Thomas Murphy, with Pavlik writing that the entire town would hear from him, quote, in a big way. Fortunately for history, Murphy did more than just read Pavlik's letters. He tracked the postmark of those letters, which were from places like Washington, Hyannisport, and Palm Beach, all places where the Kennedy family was living. Murphy spoke with Earl Sweeney, a part-time police officer in Belmont, and Sweeney contacted the U.S. Secret Service. The Secret Service quickly learned of Pavlik's obsession with the Kennedys, and the fact that he had recently purchased multiple sticks of dynamite. Pavlik was stalking the Kennedy family. He followed their movements, took pictures of their Hyannisport home, and observed their security. Security for the president-elect wasn't what it is today, and that gave Pavlik a very dangerous opportunity. The Kennedy family had a beachfront estate at 1095 North Ocean Drive in Palm Beach, Florida. Kennedy stayed there regularly. In fact, he spent much of December 1960 there, working out the details of his upcoming administration. Pavlik followed Kennedy to Palm Beach. On September 11, 1960, President-elect Kennedy attended church at St. Edward Church in Palm Beach. That morning, Kennedy exited Mass, and Pavlik was there. Pavlik's plan was simple. He had loaded his car with dynamite and planned on driving his car into Kennedy's in the hopes that the subsequent fire would cause an explosion. However, to Pavlik's surprise, Kennedy had been joined at church by his wife, Jacqueline, and their two young children, Caroline and John. Caroline was 3, while John was only a few weeks old. Pavlik stopped and didn't move. He would later say, quote, "I did not want to harm her or the children." Kennedy moved on, unaware that he had just missed an attempt on his life. Pavlik planned on trying again, even getting inside of the church to inspect its interior. Fortunately, the law caught up with him. 4 days later, on December 15th, Palm Beach officer Lester Free identified Pavlik's 1950 Buick while he was attempting to enter the city via the Flagler Memorial Bridge. Pavlik was stopped, backup was called, and Pavlik was arrested. 7 sticks of dynamite were found in the car. The Secret Service would report that the dynamite was enough to blow up a small mountain. Other reports said that the amount of dynamite was enough to, quote, blow up a good-sized building, and use the New Hampshire state capitol as an example. After his arrest, Pavlik would say, quote, "I had the crazy idea that I wanted to stop Kennedy from being president." Pavlik was also quoted as saying, "The Kennedy money bought him the White House. I wanted to teach the United States that the presidency is not for sale." Pavlik was committed to a federal medical center before being moved to the New Hampshire State Hospital. A judge found Pavlik was mentally ill and thus not responsible for his crimes. Pavlik would spend another 5 years in the hospital before being discharged in December 1966. Thankfully, this is more or less the end of the story for Pavlik. According to information obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request, Pavlik was tracked by the United States Secret Service for years after his discharge. An understandable move given his desire to once kill the president. Pavlik would live out his days in relative quiet. He spent time with extended family and friends, even receiving citations and honors when he turned 85. He would continue to express his opinions on politics and government, writing President Ford with his opinions on how to create jobs and lower taxes. Wonder if he had a dynamite tax. Anyway, Pavlik would die in 1975. The unknown, of course, is this. What would have happened if Pavlik had succeeded in his plan? It would have been uncharted territory for the United States, as a president had never died after winning an election but before being sworn in. Lyndon Johnson would have become president, but the rest is in the air. The real question is one based on policy. What would have been the fate of the civil rights movement or the Bay of Pigs invasion? Would Johnson have made the same mistakes, but then learned the same good lessons during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Richard Pavlik came frighteningly close to Kennedy and to completing an unprecedented assassination. Thankfully, in this instance, almost doesn't count. Kennedy lived on December 11, 1960, unaware that he was almost the victim of an attempt on his life. And once again, thank you all for watching, and that is it for this edition of Almost Something. I hope you enjoyed this venture into history, and if you did, please comment below, please like this video, but most important, and I need to make this a direct ask, please subscribe. The more you subscribe, the more I know that these videos are on the right track, and I want to make sure that I am producing things that people out there will enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, my friends, and as always, don't let there be any almost anymore.